I'm J.G. Michael, and this is Parallax Views. This edition of Parallax Views is brought to you by the $10 and above tier supporters of Parallax Views on Patreon. So, with that in mind, producers credit shoutouts to Gunnar, Mark, Alexander, Catherine, Tilo, Emilia, Jeff, John, Bert, Brian, Elliot, Michael, Brace, James, Nick, Mersham, Galen, Arlen, Bo, Christopher, Michael, Gigadelic Media, Chance, Chase, Dan, David H., Y. Kellerman, Saaded 13, Kathleen, David, Ava, Bob, The West Bank Robbery Podcast, Jamie, Enoch, Gary, Max, Ishtofer, James, Martin, Matthew Ho, Brian, Nobody, Thomas, and Dano. And now on to the show. Hey there, Parallax Views listeners. I've been getting over a case of food poisoning, so my apologies for the lack of new episodes. This edition of the program is going to be a little different. It's a preview of the Parallax vlog. That's the Patreon show we try to do each month with yours truly and C. Derek Varn of the Varn vlog over on YouTube. Derek is a longtime collaborator and commentator on issues related to politics, education, and much, much more. We've been working for a long time together, going back to when we were involved with Zero Books, and we did a show there called Alternatives. In any case, this is a 30-minute excerpt from the latest Parallax vlog, the Parallax Views Varn vlog crossover show, and it deals with Project 2025 and my interview with Adolph Reed. If you're unfamiliar with Project 2025, it's a plan by elements of the American right wing to consolidate executive power. Derek has a lot of thoughts on this and a lot of criticism of Democrats from a left-wing perspective. This portion of the program deals specifically with Project 2025. In the members-only audio that you can hear on patreon.com, the whole show will be up shortly. You'll hear more about the situation of the DSA and much, much more. So, with all that in mind, let's get right to it with C. Derek Varn. It's another edition of the Parallax vlog with C. Derek Varn and yours truly, J.G. Michael. And this might as well be called the "Oh my God, what a shit show" edition of the program, especially with everything that's been happening lately with the presidential election, Joe Biden's debate performance, and all kinds of other things. I mean, there's alternative media drama going on. Hopefully we won't get into that as much, but maybe we'll end up there.
What the fuck does alternative media drama mean anymore? I mean, I don't know what alternative media means.
I don't think they're... Yeah. Well, go on.
No, I mean, like all these alternative media people have funders. They're not all patron funded. So the idea that you're getting some kind of reality outside of the mainstream press is about as serious as the alt weeklies from the 90s being still a non-commercial, non-conformist option when they're 90% ads. I don't know what those fucking terms mean anymore, if they ever had any meaning at all. And I mean, I know you're referring to Nina Power. We don't want to go Powers. We don't want to go too much into that. The response.
It's funny how you read my mind. I didn't even mention that to you before the show, but you knew I was referring to it.
Mm-hmm. compact. I mean, power situation is actually uh, an interesting development that we're going to have to talk about, which is why can't conservatism reach out under its own name right now? It can't. Like, it doesn't have, like, conservatism as a brand doesn't have a lot of purchase. Even though people are very frustrated with liberals and leftists, even though um I mean, the DNC is a fucking shit show that's obviously been using its influence over the media to hide the fact that Biden has been sundowning half the time. Um, the the most unfortunate thing right now, that to get like to the truth of the state or the situation of the state, I have to read across ideological sources. And if I do that, I'll probably, when I admit that I do that, when I admit that I'm reading Aaron McIntyre as much as I am Bhaskar Sankara, because I don't like either one of them. I mean, Sankara is an okay person, but um, and I don't know. Aaron McIntyre might be an okay person too. I highly doubt it, but maybe. Um, but to get any sense of all the different problems, because everyone's approaching this like an elephant, like blind men with the elephant, that old parable from the sutras, where like they're just touching parts of it and making their own analysis, and their analysis fits their prior worldview. And the general public as a whole just doesn't have any idea what to make of it, except that everything seems to be worse and worse and worse than they're told. Um, I mean, for example, Trump came in, Trump is beating Biden in almost every poll. Biden's poll numbers dropped initially from a landslide, but the people who are surprised are Democrats. And then when you look up, the mechanism for that, they're like, oh, we'll throw Kamala Harris in there. I'm like, how are you going to distance Harris from this administration? Furthermore, this week, knowing you
Well,
what
real
you
quick, let's say they don't end up like let's say, I mean, there's a lot of scenarios, right? There's Biden stays in the race. There's the people
which is
saying,
the statistically most likely scenario still.
right, and there's people saying Kamala should take his place. And then I see other people floating around other alternative candidates. Like, I think the one that a lot of Democrats probably feel is safest, although he's not nationally known enough, is
It's Pritzker.
I was thinking Bashir.
Bashir, Pritzker seem to both be the two names that come up a lot.
Yeah. But I
Um,
think if that's done, I mean, the
but if
progressive
that's
wing's
done, you
going to
got
be
a
angry.
you got a Gerald Ford situation.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
how would you do that? You'd have to have Biden declare his running mate to be um not Kamala, someone new, and then he'd have to immediately step down. That would be the only like real clear legal way without it just being like the convention literally deciding some random ass third option without any democratic input whatsoever,
right,
which would also be delegitimizing. There's not a good answer to the problem, and they did
right,
it to themselves.
right.
So, originally you and I were going to talk about Adolph Reed's discussion with you about Project 2025. And one of the things I wanted to get in is like, there's some serious, scary shit in that 900 pages. Absolutely. I've told you, however, if they actually tried to do all of it, we would descend into civil war and the military would probably coup the president.
Right.
They've also given the state apparatus 2 years' notice. Project 2025 is not new. Democrats have just only discovered it in the last couple of weeks, but it's been
Do you
around
want to
for
talk about
fucking
what
years.
Project 2025 is? Because I feel like the way it gets talked about, people say, "Oh, it's the Fourth Reich," and I don't think these explanations really cut it anymore.
Project 2025 started out as a Heritage Foundation program to set up how to rearrange the administrative state. totally within the purview of the presidency. The only thing that stops this from the rearranging of the administrative state with party loyalists is unofficial, non-legal norms. All right. It is the idea that you don't purge all your experts. Um, all the way down through the department. Now, we know that Trump is willing to do stuff like this because he did it with the judiciary. That's absolutely true. We also know that Biden, one of the things the Biden administration has been doing is counteracting Trump's games in the judiciary, but it's done nothing about the Supreme Court, nothing at all, despite many things floated in its Supreme Court review panel that maybe they needed to stack the court, they needed to consider term limits, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the term limits thing, that's not going to happen because that requires an amendment to do, but they could stack the courts legally. So much of what people argue is normative, as if it's legal, is not actually the fucking law. It is just convention. Some of the convention is also not very old. Chevron deference, that's not a convention. That actually was a law, but which has been ended as of this week by the Supreme Court. One of the interesting things about Chevron deference, though, is that was a conservative court that passed that. And what it actually allowed
that was Reagan era. Yeah.
Yep. And what it actually allowed Reagan to do was stack specialists that agreed with him in the EPA. It is not like after Chevron deference, we had like the heroic period of the EPA in the 70s under Nixon and Carter, right? That's all before that. People don't know that, though. They don't really have the timeline. They don't have a long durée view or even a medium durée view. I mean, we're talking about Chevron deference happened in my lifetime. I'm 43 years old. The other thing about the Chevron deference is like people are like, oh, it's taking power away from the legislature. The legislature has been taking power away from itself since the 1960s. Mostly around progressives and, survey says, the judiciary, because they seem to think that the Warren Court would somehow be normative for the future. What was the Warren Court doing? The Warren Court was a way to get around the fact that the Civil Rights Acts were actually starting civil strife, and legislatures were beginning to get cowardly about it. And conservative organizations such as the John Birch Society were getting better at countering them. So this tendency for the legislature not to actually do its fucking job is about 3 generations old now. It really got bad with some reforms that liberals wanted, and actually some libertarians wanted, that removed, quote, pork barrel spending from bills, which meant that there was no way for legislatures to get material compromises for ideological compromises, which further hardened the two ideological divisions. This also was a trend going back to the Nixon campaign, which wanted the parties to be ideologically sorted, not just sorted on basis of large coalitions of interest. What is interesting about that is the Democrats have never particularly been ideologically sorted. I know everyone thinks they are, but it's always been just like the liberals and left together, it's always been kind of an incoherent mess anyway. So you got all this going on. Now, let's go back to Project 2025. 2025 also has a ton of different conservative groups throwing their wish list in it. I mean, they want to return to the gold standard. They want to ban pornography. Everyone brings that up because it freaks people out.
You know what freaks me out about it is just the implication of I mean, theoretically, you could get rid of all these federal civil servants, right? And replace them with loyalists. And like, let's say you do that with the FDA.
You can do that now.
Well, sure.
It's totally legal now. That's the thing. Like, it just hasn't happened.
No one has acted on it, is what you're saying.
Right. I mean, Trump did act on it a little bit in his first administration. Right. Here's the thing, though. One.
What I was going to say is scary about it is the idea of like, well, you know, let's replace someone in the FDA with like some Alex Jones type that thinks we should have colloidal silver in the water, you know, that type of thing.
I get why you're worried about that, and I'm not saying you shouldn't be, but we
Well,
already
yeah, and you
have
have Clarence Thomas going after Ocean now. I mean, am I being too much of a liberal for you?
you're being a stupid fucking liberal.
Okay.
Like, oh my god, yeah, yeah. Clarence Thomas is going after OSHA. OSHA's already been mostly gutted by the Supreme Court already during the Biden administration. State the incoherence of federal law created by the Supreme Court has already pushed most of the stuff back to the states. The right has achieved on the state level far more than it wanted to achieve under the Biden administration than it did under the Trump administration. Those are objective facts. So when I hear that we're going to vote to protect ourselves from that, from something that frankly could be done at any time if anyone had the balls to do it. Come on, JG. Those aren't even protected by law. That's just convention. And the conventions by both parties have already been shot. And by the way, if they did this, it could be undone under the next administration. Now, that's not actually great, right? But that's already where we're at. That's already true. The Supreme Court ruling on federal exemption, which I think is a bigger deal because it de jure expands immunity from qualified immunity like cops have from civil suits to absolute immunity from even criminal suits. However, de facto, that's already been true too. And that was tested in the Obama administration when he sent drones to kill American citizens in foreign countries when we were not in wartime with no trial.
Awalaki. Yeah.
Correct. So, again, we already know the Reagan and Bush administration stacked the EPA and FDA with all kinds of bullshit too. And they also created regulatory capture and all this. And this was all under Chevron deference. I just want people to understand that they think they're fighting for democracy and they're not. Now, I do agree. No, you don't want an Alex Jones type in the FDA, but they've already appointed leaders to that. What you're worried about is actually not just the leadership, because the leadership is often political appointments of wackadoos anyway. That's true now. It's that they're going to try to push through tests for all administration. I think that is something to be concerned about, but I don't even think it's something to be concerned about just for the reason you do. I think it's something to be concerned about because it's going to create large scales of disenfranchised government professionals who are now out in the open and in the streets and will be looking for both work and maybe revenge. So it's just a very bad way to run a country, which is why people generally don't do it. But it's not illegal. It doesn't require change. Democrats could do it now themselves.
I mean, let's get into that Adolph Reed interview because I think between the three of us, we all have very different views on Project 2025. I mean, Adolph Reed called it, the advent of, fascism in America, and there's this idea that this is like the opening salvo of like the Fourth Reich in America, the Thousand Year Reich or whatever. I just think it's a bank robbery in a lot of ways, or at least that's how it comes off to me. I think you differ from both of us on this.
I think it could be a bank robbery.
Okay.
I don't see it. The part that you're afraid of can already happen at any moment. It doesn't even require Trump. Any conservative, anybody could do this tomorrow, like if they got elected. All right, and
I agree with you on that, but I mean, I guess it's a matter of who's willing to pull that trigger.
What people should be more concerned about is the Supreme Court, and you've already lost that. And
Right.
the ability to handle that was between 2020 and 2022. They didn't. It's done. you've already lost a major
There's
factor.
already been a judicial coup of sorts. Yeah.
Right. And
Okay.
it took 15 years to happen, but it's over. Like you can like yes, there's people appointing activists to all kinds of stuff. The federal court has also made it pretty clear, and as has Trump, that there are limits to how much of the conservative agenda that they're willing to nationalize. So there's stuff in 2020 and Project 2025 that I don't think Trump's going to do, some of which requires two houses of legislation. And I'm predicting the GOP will probably only have one because the GOP Congress this last 2 years has been a disaster and is very, very unpopular. What is missed about this is yes, I listened to your episode and I listened to the not John Stewart, John Oliver piece about the problems with people being aligned behind Trump. But what is actually very interesting, if you look at the GOP and the legislature today, who the fuck are they aligned behind? Like they're aligned behind Trump, but nobody, even Trump doesn't seem to agree on what that is. Like Marjorie Taylor Greene are the current speaker, like et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I do agree with you that I'm not saying Project 2025 is a nothing burger, but it's not a bank robbery. It is literally them saying they're actually going to use the power that they're legally endowed to have. I don't like the crazier shit in there. Dismantling the FBI, dismantling the Department of Education, defunding the DOJ. They're defunding the DOJ would be a disaster, and they know it. Some of that stuff has got to be in there because Trump has a coalition of people who, I mean, if you read it, and I have read most of that 900 pages, um, it would collapse the country to do what they want to do if they did all of it, not the administrative stuff. I mean, like dismantling all the administrative departments. And JG, they've been promising to dismantle most of the administrative departments since fucking Goldwater. They don't do it. Trump might. All right. I'm not, but the
Okay.
amount of
I
financial chaos that would immediately ensue would probably lead to capital in the military strongly opposing him.
I get your point, by the way, that they can do it. I guess it would just be a matter of, I mean, they'd be breaking the norms, but
The norms
it's
are fucking like only a generation old. A lot of these norms are very new. A lot of this shit goes back to the 70s and 80s. That's it.
that's true. Yeah.
Like the high people don't know their history. Like they think that a lot of the progressive legislation that they really like came from the time periods where these things were in standing. They didn't, and they don't. Furthermore, I mean, I know a lot of people say, oh, Barnes not afraid of Trump. I mean, I think Trump's a serious threat. But look at what the Democrats have done. Really look at it. They have normalized a good deal of the policies that they opposed during the Trump administration. Immigration normalized and expanded upon. And Biden can't even counter that he basically did Trump's policy, and Trump is still trying to attack him on as, normal stuff where maybe we just take an auto de fe of all the illegal immigrants and burn them on the White House lawn or whatever, as Ben Burgess said, because that seems to be the only thing he really had. The shenanigans of the debate, beyond the fact that Biden was sundowning, is that Biden couldn't make a case for himself even if he was cogent. There's not one to be made. So, if you're afraid of 2020 Project 2025, you have to ask the question, why did you empower these fucking losers in the first place if they're your only guard against it? Because they've done a very bad job.
So is that your biggest problem with the Reed interview, or
Because also they say this shit every 4 fucking years. Him, Chomsky, all these old fuckers. We're always in danger of fascism. Motherfucker, fascism's been here the whole time.
Varn is on fire tonight?
Yes, things have gotten better. The high period of things getting better, though, was between the 1950s and the 1970s. The exceptions to that were certain Supreme Court rulings that were narrowly passed in the aughts on sexuality issues. Texas versus, I forget the exact one. The Texas case, which finally got rid of sodomy laws. I think it's either 99 or 2000. That's a big one because I know people forget, but it was illegal to be gay in about 25 states in the United States until the end of the 90s, early aughts.
That's
The
Lawrence
obvious
versus Texas, right?
Lawrence versus Texas. Yeah, I almost said Texas versus White, but that's a Civil War one. Um, then there is a Burgerfell, right? But again, narrow ruling. Um, the Democrats had a slate of things that they knew they needed to fix. They knew they needed to fix the ACA. They didn't do it. They didn't even try to do it. This has been something Obama's been saying for years. He knew that there was poison pills in the ACA. He had the faith this future Democratic administration would fix it. Now that was hubris, but also they didn't try. And again, the Democrats came in like the Republicans don't tend to come in with strong multi-house leads. The Democrats have come in the last 20 years twice, controlling both houses of Congress and the presidency. And in the case of the first Obama term, they had a supermajority, which no one had had since the fucking 60s. And they did jack with it.
Why is that?
There's no platform programmatic unity in the Democratic Party. So I mean, and I don't know, like that, Biden's agenda could have been a lot more robust if he was willing to betray Joe Manchin, but he wasn't, and Joe Manchin betrayed them anyway. Right. And in the Obama administration, you had about 6 Joe Manchins. There was an expansion into red states, which they desperately needed. But the thing is, they botched it so thoroughly that it allowed the Republicans to take over on a judicial. I mean, not a judicial, on a vote on a census year, which means that they could set the terms for voting as far as gerrymandering in 2010, and that happened, again in 2020, although the Democrats did eventually take over. It's just amazing to me. I mean, people like Reed and Chomsky are part of the reason why 70% of the population thinks we need a third party, but only 2% of the population would ever risk voting for one.
So to be fair to Reed here, he's only
Down
started
with the
this.
olds. Down with the olds.
He's only started this. Well, I'm willing to vote for the lying neoliberal warmonger since 2016.
Correct.
So, do you think he's just drifted into that Zen Chomsky territory of?
I think he's afraid.
Okay.
I think he's right to be afraid.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, my argument here is not that you guys are wrong to be afraid. My argument is like, you were wrong to ever feel safe in the first place, and the Democrats aren't going to protect you.
Right.
And if you can't see that at this point, I don't know what else it's going to fucking take.
Right.
Like, And I get it. Like, yes, you only really have two options. That's not even constitutional. That's actually state constitution shit. Like, it's 50 different sets of laws you have to change. Running a third party requires that. But we also see that the idea that you could invade one of these parties and change them kind of worked with the Republicans, but right now it's made them incoherent. The attempt to do that with the Democrats has been an utter failure, because their funders can steal off progressives pretty quickly. And they can fund people against them when they're not stealable, unless they're in very specific districts, like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib.
Well, that does it for this edition of Parallax Views. I plan on doing more episodes like this going forward because, as you know, if you've been listening for the past month or so, my advertising situation is not the same as it used to be. So I don't have an advertiser right now. I could really use one. So I'm going to be promoting the Patreon a lot more. I may even have to paywall some more content. I don't know if or how I'm going to do that, but I really need more Patreon support to keep this show going, given the advertiser situation. And your support would be very much appreciated. You can listen to the rest of this episode, which clocks in at a nice 2 hours at patreon.com/parallaxviews. If it's not up yet, it will be up in the next day or so. This is just a preview, and we delve into a lot of other topics, including the DSA, Davos, etc., in the longer form episode. Most of the discussion of Project 2025 is really in that first half hour that you heard. Let me know what you thought of it on Twitter or Facebook, social media. Contact me there. Let me know your thoughts. Get the word out about the Patreon. Patreon.com/parallaxviews. One more time, that's patreon.com/parallaxviews. And with that being said, until next time, you've been listening to Parallax Views with Parallax Views to Parallax Views with Parallax Views.
The way out is not simply to say, don't do it, just to prohibit. It's nothing else. If we don't do it, others will be doing it like crazy. So, we have to confront the problem. But no, basically, I know of the great anxieties, problems, new forms of control, but it's also new forms of freedom. This is why I always emphasize that internet and all this new digital stuff, it's a very ambiguous phenomenon, but it's the field of struggle. New forms of enslavement, but at the same time, new incredible forms of freedom. We have to accept the fight with no nostalgia for old, allegedly more authentic communities or whatever. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid. I'm not afraid.